Welcome, everyone, to this week's Women on the Week Roundtable Sharp Perspectives. I'm joined, as always, with the incredible Jody Redoran, editor in chief of The Forward, and Felissa Kramer, editor in chief of JTA. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Meredith Jacobs, CEO of Jewish Women International. Our special guest this week is Laurie Moskowitz, Principal of Law Strategies in Washington, D.C. Laurie is a 25-year veteran of both campaigns and advocacy work, having served in senior positions in the national political scene and prominent advocacy organizations both in and out of the Jewish community. She was senior director for the U.S. campaign for the One campaign. You may know that is the advocacy group dedicated to fighting extreme poverty that was founded by Bono of U2. She founded and ran Fieldworks, which is one of the nation's premier grassroots communications and field strategy firms, and has worked with the National Democratic Party in numerous capacities, including the presidential campaigns of Vice President Al Gore, Senator Kerry, Secretary Hillary Clinton, and President Obama. So welcome, Laurie.
Great to be here.
We have a lot to talk about this week, as always. So first, World Zionist Congress. This was something, quite honestly, was not on my radar previously. This year, I started seeing people I knew running for it. So I'm wondering, could one of you kind of, number one, quickly explain to people what it is, why it's important, and then let's dive into the controversy of this week. So who wants to take a crack at this?
Sure, I'm happy to take it because I actually worked on the World Zionist Congress campaign here in the US. So pretty simply, the World Zionist Congress is, it was started by Theodore Herzl. It is a Congress that meets in Israel every 5 years, I believe. And basically, what it does is it brings together diaspora and Israeli Jews, and it actually controls a fair amount of money in Israel and helps decide how this money is allocated among different institutions, including the religious, sort of the religious streams and education. And so for American Jews who care about pluralism, this is a pretty important piece of the equation, but it's clearly something that's sort of obscure and most people don't know about it. There was a much bigger campaign from all groups this year.
Wait, can I just interrupt and ask, the money that's being allocated, is this money that's budgeted from the government, or is this money that somehow has been donated by Jews in the diaspora? Like, what is the money that they're giving out?
It's a combination, but a large amount of it comes from money that is donated, into different places like JNF, Jewish National Fund, right? So
you actually have to pay to vote in the elections, and you have to pay. I mean, it's a nominal fee. I think it was $7 or something. You have to pay, and you have to declare yourself a Zionist in order to participate in this election. Other than that, I think anybody can play. And there was like some kind of crazy high turnout. Felissa probably knows this is the highest turnout for this election in the history of these elections
ever.
So you pay $7 and say, I want to be in the Congress. But
no, just to vote. There's like hundreds of people who run to be in the Congress, but then just to vote, you have to pay. And I think that money also goes into what they end up allocating.
Yeah. Vote in addition to the people who are in the Congress, or the
but
people
vote for who you want to be in the Congress.
Okay.
Slates of different people. So the Reform Movement slate, a big progressive slate ran called Hatikva. There was a conservative movement slate, Merkaz, and then a tremendous amount of Russian and right-wing slates, Orthodox slates, who ran. And that's where the controversy began, right? Because they organized big time this year and actually gained control of the Congress for the first time ever, not just from the Orthodox, but sort of the, kind of right-wing faction around the world had enough votes to control the Congress. And so, what happened was they proposed this crazy scenario, which had all sorts of, the entire agenda and positions that are controlled by the Congress, were skewed to the right and to the Orthodox. And that, caused a big, giant controversy this week.
Okay, so now let's get to the controversy.
Well, that was a controversy, basically, which is that, again, there were these positions, they were going to control all the positions, they were going to control all the money. They wanted a new bureau of, I think it was like secular education for the Orthodox. I mean, it was really unbalanced. And as a result, what I like to call a little women to the rescue, you know, Hadassah, WIZO, the Women's International Zionist Organization, the Reform, the Conservative, sort of the left-leaning movements, Hatikva, all sort of banded together and were able to renegotiate the entire thing, providing more balance, and also for the first time ever, opening up a position for a woman to be head of the Congress.
So who is that woman who was
I don't
elected?
get elected yet. Someone else may know.
Oh,
I think they haven't decided who. It's going to be nominated, I think by which party? The Yesh Atid party in Israel is going to nominate this person, but it's not done yet.
but it's just been said that it will be a woman. They just specified it will be a woman.
So women to the rescue.
I think your description of all of this, I mean, is obviously perfect and also speaks to like why it is a very, very difficult story to cover and understand, right? Like this is just just an extremely different way to think about how governments work, how money is distributed. Like there's a level of direct democracy around like the distribution of funds that is, I think, surprising and like to many. And then exactly what you just responded to, Meredith, like, wait, so they're creating a position, it's going to be for a woman, but they haven't picked the woman. Like, it's just surprising and different and strange. And I would say that that's been a challenge as a journalist to like, when this is my first time, even, you know, I never knew about this as a Jewish person 5 years ago, or the last time it happened. So it's a challenge to cover and I think to explain to people, but exactly what you said, Lori, like there's a lot of money at stake, and that money is, and that, you know, the distribution of that money is really core to big questions about what is Israel, how do Jews in the diaspora, like what stake do Jews in the diaspora have, like what
Yeah,
life is like in Israel every day. Yeah.
As much as there is real money at stake, and fine, maybe we should care about it or know more about it than we do, but I think there's this other thing about this story that's, I don't know, emblematic. It's just, this is, you know, it's another forum in which the same fight is happening, the same fight between kind of liberal or secular Jews and Orthodox Haredi Jews, the same fight somewhat between Israel and the diaspora, or like how should the diaspora relate to Israel, especially around the questions of how Israel handles what it means to be Jewish, how religious practices is determined. And it's just like, now there's this new forum, but it's the same fight.
That's right.
And how it's tied to money, that if Jews in the diaspora are the ones contributing the bulk of the money, does that entitle us to a say of how that's money used? Or is the idea that we give Israel money and Israel makes those decisions? So doesn't it further kind of complicate things when it comes to the role that Jews in the diaspora see themselves playing?
I mean, look, it is an incredibly complicated entity. And I think, you know, the fact that this is what remains and that most American Jews have no idea what the Congress is and what it does. I mean, I think if anything, people have maybe heard of, you know, the Jewish National Fund, right? But beyond that, they don't really, you know what it does. And so to you know, I think it just complicates it, right? It's like this another weird entity that, you know, people don't understand. And yet within Israel, you know, it has very real implications for how you grow pluralism in the state of Israel, and how, you know, you grow a society that is really, you know, a democratic society that is accepting of all forms of Judaism.
Jody, when you were in Jerusalem, working as the bureau chief for the New York Times, how did you cover this? Did you? I mean, what was it like over there?
How did I cover the World Zionist Congress?
Yeah.
I did not. Although I guess it was while I was there. I don't remember. I have the most vague memory of this because, and the reason, I mean, one reason might be because I was doing a bad job, but another reason was because the 2015 elections were not a big deal. And maybe in 14 and 19, but the liberal Jewish world decided to make this a thing. this year for in a way that they had not done before. And I think the other parts of the Jewish spectrum responded to some extent, and everybody kind of upped their game and put a bunch more money into these elections and a bunch more publicity. And that led to this record turnout, and now led us to this, well, Dana Bash said shit show on CNN, so I suppose I can say it here, right? Anyway, so, but that's new. Like that, I mean, I don't think that, I don't know if,
I mean, that's
again,
new, but you were covering
Congress 5 years ago.
You were
Sorry.
covering the underlying questions. So the questions that are at stake
for
here,
sure.
that you were covering, like what kind
Yeah,
of
that's what I was going to say. So,
produce, and I want to hear about that.
I mean, you know, it's interesting because I'm hosting an event next week about 25 years after Rabin's assassination, looking at Israeli democracy and really looking at the internal Jewish tension between Haredim and mostly secular Jews in Israel, but I think from a diaspora perspective, liberal Jews, Reform and conservative Jews as well. And so when I was there, I mean, there were two maybe huge issues that blew up while I was there on this score. The first was the Haredi draft, whether or not Haredim should be required to serve in the IDF. And there was a lot of, the 2013 elections were in many ways governed by that question. Yesh Atid's existence and Yair Lapid's emergence was in many ways about that issue. And it was connected very deeply to the social protests that had happened in 2011 and the economic, the dire economic situation for a lot of secular Tel Avivis who couldn't afford to buy apartments. And here they were seeing all these government subsidies to Haredim who weren't working and who weren't serving. Nothing really came of that. The legislation that passed, I mean, there's been a little bit of movement on both getting more Haredim into the army. And actually, I had a significant story that was very interesting about training of Haredim just for professional jobs. And it was really interesting about Haredim entering the workplace rather than studying Kollel full time. I think that, you know, what's happening now is the way, I mean, a lot of those undercurrents have continued and then they really exploded in the COVID crisis. And, you know, I would say in parallel to what we've seen here in New York, but really in a more heightened way, the way that the Haredim and the rest of the country have kind of experienced COVID has gotten really ugly. And in the second wave of coronavirus in Israel was very much concentrated in the Haredi enclaves and towns. And there was the COVID czar there, you know, proposed a crackdown on those areas, and Netanyahu basically refused to crack down more specifically on Haredi areas than other areas, and ended up in a full lockdown of the country, basically for fear of his coalition falling apart. So it continues to just really govern daily life and politics, this question of the Haredi hold on the coalition government and on religious spaces in Israel.
Fascinating, which kind of leads me a little bit to a transition into US politics. And I'm seeing this week a lot of reporting coming out about how the Jews are voting. How are the Jews voting in Florida? How are they voting? Laurie, I know this was something you were able to talk about. What I kind of want to find out, is this bad for the Jews to be coming out with these polls that really are already feel like they're further polarizing the Jewish community, setting us up to kind of internally blame each other depending on who you're supporting and what the results will ultimately be. But you know, how do we wrap our heads around how are the Jews voting?
Sure. So, you know, this is to me is like, you know, a piece of disinformation that is an age-old trope, right? That Jews are going to vote for the Republican and walk away from the Democratic Party, you know, and we just know time and time again that is not true. And so what you have, you know, is people trying to, you know, create divisiveness and create, you know, they want to put out a poll because they want to make news, they want to sort of get into the news cycle. And it's not, I think it's not good for the Jews, right? You know, you might end up with blame on both sides of the aisle if someone loses by, you know, a few hundred votes or a few thousand votes here or there, you know, but there are very much people trying to sow divisiveness, you know, sow unrest and pick people off. And, you know, I think it's not great for the Jews. I think it's, you know, one of these things that, again, goes to exactly what Jody's talking about, right? The right and left divide in the Jewish community, you know, it's worse and worse, and it's harder for people to get into that middle when you have these situations that pit, different communities of the Jews against each other.
I'll disagree because as a journalist, right, more information with context is always better. And I'm glad that we have information about how Jews say they're going to vote, in part because I think because of how polarized our society is generally, the fact that these polls are showing no real changes is kind of surprising. And you might expect something different based on, the tenor of debate on social or even in real life. So I think this is, you're right, it's helpful to know, it's helpful to report. I hope we're doing a good job of, putting this data in context, and, helping readers make sense of it.
Yeah,
But
Alyssa,
yeah,
I
think,
really agree. I mean, I think that, the Jewish community is not, I would say, as polarized on Republican Democrat as the country, because, there's fewer Republican Jews. But even if what the latest poll says Biden has 75% of Jews or whatever, I mean, that 25% is a lot. And I think, the most important thing is for people to, I think, understand and empathize with each other's perspectives. And, most of the distinction between who Jews prefer in these elections, I think, is really not about anything that has anything to do with Judaism.
Right.
Some slice of it might have to do with Israel, but most of that is, I think, misunderstanding. But, there are real divides in our community about everything. And there are obviously real divides in the country about this election and about most things too. And that's like deeply concerning. And information and journalism is an important thing to work in the breach there. It doesn't know, I don't know, polls aren't the whole thing. Polls are the very much, beginning, yeah. But we've done a number of stories, and I know you have too, Felissa, just like, what are Jewish Trump voters thinking? Who are they? What are the why? How has Trump's handling of coronavirus affected their support for him, if it has? And I think that's really important for non-Trump supporters to read.
Yeah, I don't disagree that, people shouldn't hear real true facts and that they shouldn't be, sort of contextualized, right? I do think there's plenty of bad actors who take these things and run with them, and they use them to actually try and literally pull people away, and sort of say, oh, it's okay, look at all these people leaving the Democratic Party. I mean, there's just bad actors who sow disinformation online. It's really easy to do. You see it in different places and it just pops up. And I think, we have to be, I would say voters and citizens need to be really careful about what they're reading and make sure that the sources of what they're reading are true, and that they're not paying attention to, sort of, look where someone's source and intention is when you read this information, because it's really easy to manipulate these days.
And that's why you should read The Forward and JTA as trusted news sources. But Laura, let's use that to pivot into kind of what we were going to use as our deeper dive this week. We've seen announcements from Facebook, I believe yesterday or the day before, from TikTok, saying that they were changing their policies and practices around anti-Semitism online. It was interesting. I watched the State Department's conference this week, which I know is problematic because they were really just focusing on anti-Semitism coming from the left. But the gentleman from TikTok was talking about needing to break the filter bubble, which of course we all understand. If you like dogs, you're going to start seeing more dogs. I have dogs all the time on all of my social media. But if you like hate, you get more hate. And how do they disrupt that? And how do we monitor the policies that they're now professing to implement? So Lori, I want to turn to you to really, dive into this.
Yeah, well, so when they're talking about the filter bubble, let's talk about what that is. That's the algorithm that most of the platforms use to actually serve you up things that you like, right? And it's the core of all of these business models. It's, for those folks who remember the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, that's what that was about this summer, right? Which is that, the platforms, serve up the sensational and what they think you want to see and what's sort of clickable, and that's what proliferates it. And so that's what TikTok is talking about. it's good that they're doing this, right? They're sort of going into not just anti-Semitism, but what they're calling neighboring ideologies, right? So they're doing white nationalism, right? They're doing white genocide theory, right? They're taking those things off the platform, and those are that's really, really positive. The piece that is hard for all of these platforms is enforcement, because even though they say these things, you continue to see it on the platform. And that goes to who they're using to enforce it and how they're doing it. So it may be great that they say, yeah, we're going to take off, Holocaust denial. But, if you have somebody doing the enforcement who's sitting in a country that's not the US and actually has no context for what, anti-Semitism actually is, it's really hard for them to pull down Holocaust denial. Or again, bad actors who might change literally a letter or two, in the title of something or in their post, and it doesn't read exactly right, and their machine capture doesn't get it. So enforcement, right? These platforms have to enforce. And that's, the devil's in the details there, because I think we all have to, get, a piece of monitoring, like the organizations who are involved in this have to continue to monitor them. People need to be digital and report. I don't know if people notice, but literally now Facebook in particular has an oversight board, and people can now appeal directly to Facebook's oversight board. And there's a couple of tools out there too that you can use. There's a browser plugin called the Election Deception Tracker, which you can get from Chrome or Firefox, and literally it will sit on your Facebook browser, right click, send it into a database. Mozilla, who makes Firefox, puts out something called the Regrets Reporter, which is on YouTube. So if you get served up something that you don't want, report it. Put the Regrets Reporter on your browser. So there are good tools for people. I'd say.
And then the idea is that when we have these browsers and we report, that's going to these oversight boards. Well, then, can you also talk about why this is so dangerous? This is, to use Samantha Guthrie's phrase, more than just your crazy uncle retweeting something. What is so insidious about what these groups are doing online?
I mean, what they're doing online is they're just, pushing out pernicious misinformation. And, it's amazing how many people actually, this is what they're inundated with all day long. And so it starts to get into your psyche. It plays on your fears, it makes you feel like, there's something out there. And then worst of all, people share it, which is the worst thing to do when you have something that is actually wrong. You're giving it airtime, you're helping it grow via that algorithm, and keeping it sort of going up. So it's really up to the platforms to ban the worst of it. They have a product that they're responsible for to consumers.
I think a sort of this, what I'm about to say may sound naive, and it certainly is a parochial view, but I think as troubling as the idea of millions of people believing a lot of crazy disinformation about whether it's about pedophiles running the Democratic Party or aliens being in the deep state machine or whatever, as scary as all that sounds, I actually feel like for me, what's even more unsettling is the increasing sense that you can't trust anything that you read.
Right.
And obviously this is bad for my business model, but we have seen in parallel with the rise of disinformation, we've got like a bunch of trends happening at the same time. So you've got like really bad actors with great tools for spreading misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, really bad stuff, as Lori's just described. You've also got this like massive decline in journalism, news outlets, something like half of local newspapers closed in the last decade, or half of American journalism jobs disappeared. So fewer and fewer reputable sources of news that is not bullshit. And then the third thing is, it's a reflection of those two things, I guess, but we've had plummeting trust in media, in mainstream media outlets in every poll for the last number of years. I should say that trust is plummeting in all kind of institutions. They usually ask together about government institutions, media, whatever. But so you've got less and less reporting, less and less funding for independent reporting and for kind of stable, solid news outlets, lower and lower trust. And then you've got like something like COVID happens, and it's a real public health emergency where information is life. And yet nobody trusts the sources of information. And that's partly because there are, you know, a whole industry of fact checking the president and things that come out, you know, there's this actual disinformation being spread. So it's really, it's quite unsettling. And, you know, we're sort of toiling along, trying to do real journalism and put out solid information. And it's hard enough to do that in this environment of disinformation. But I have the sense increasingly that smart people who are not taken in by QAnon or whatever are reacting by saying, I don't believe anything I read anywhere. I have actually had a friend of mine in Montclair, who's the president of our synagogue, once told me about, he's like, well, you don't believe, you know, and I'm like, of course I do. I've been working for the New York Times my whole life. Of course I believe what's in there. And he was like, I don't, you know, and smart people who do not believe what they read anywhere is like death for democracy.
I think that that's really true. And I think about this all the time because I'm not sure that lots of people would say, oh, you don't really believe. But I think that, you know, if you are paying attention, but not like working on these issues, you're getting the message all the time that like disinformation is a major problem and you have to be really careful about what you read. And there are these, you know, underlying, like you can't trust any, and like that might be true, right? Like you have to be really careful. And so everyone's on this, like if you are a responsible news consumer or a responsible person, you are on high alert. And I think that starts to do something to you and to your brain, which I feel like may be explored out there in psychology, but I don't know that I've seen this really explored all that much. Like the people who like want to have democracy are they the ones potentially being most conditioned now to not trust?
I mean, this played out, I don't know how you guys had this happen. I know we're all in different places, so we experience this probably differently, but my husband and I found it not as easy as it should have been to figure out the best way to vote. For example, there was like, it's like, so is the most reliable way to get your vote safely counted to vote in person on election day, to bring your ballot somewhere on election day, to mail your ballot in advance, to bring your ballot to a place before election day? How much before? Up until the very last, we live in New Jersey. We found out that it seemed like the best way was to bring your ballot in person in advance. So that's what we've done. Up until the day before, we weren't sure if we both had to be there or not, which it turned out not. Anyway, finding this out is like, it doesn't seem like it should take a college degree to like do all of this, but it has not been easy. And you know, we had another interesting thing, not to share too much personal information here, but like, you know, there's all this disinformation about fraud in the elections. And then 4 ballots arrived at our house, 2 for us and 2 for the people who lived here 5 years ago and who live in Florida now. And we were like, that's a pretty big opportunity for fraud. And then various friends were like, well, no, they would have had you, if you tried to vote for them, you would have had to, we threw them out, I promise. But anyway, it's like, it is shocking and disconcerting how hard it is for good actors to navigate this crazy system.
Right. And on the other hand, I know my son has not received his ballot yet. And when he goes to log on, it keeps saying it's in the mail, it's on its way to you. And the concern is now, if he shows up to vote in person, will the record somehow say, well, you should have gotten a ballot at home? And
I think this is what I'm talking about, right? Like these are like this is normal, like thing is in the mail, you ask the question, like should be normal stuff, but it's not. It's not normal because of the world we live in and the disinformation that's out there and the polarization that exists. Like nothing feels normal. And I think that that's really hard for news consumers. It's really hard for news producers, and it's really hard for just people living in the world. Like I mean, we started out talking about disinformation, but I think that this kind of murkiness and confusion affects everybody. And I don't know that we know what this is going to do to us all.
I know.
Well,
we're almost going to talk about the baking show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, we haven't even touched on the debate from last night. I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, just give everybody a break. But yes, both The Forward and JTA have reported on this very important story this week about Jewish desserts on the Great British Bake Off and how they're being handled. So who wants to start first? And again, as I said to you, this is from somebody who has built her career baking challah and has a dog named Babka. So I'm deeply invested in this story.
Well, let me just say, made in Brooklyn. baking show.
I thought the British babka was better than Brooklyn.
So my 5-year-old this week tried the babka we made on Sunday, and he said, "Oh, I guess I like a new food now." So
Oh, that's so great.
That's the new food group.
I'll add that.
On the
I'll add
pyramid, you
that.
need your vegetables, your
What
proteins,
recipe
and your
did you
babka.
We don't do
Melissa?
vegetables. We do babka and bagels and different breads.
What recipe did you make? Because I've never made babka, and my daughter and I looked at some recipe a few weeks ago, and it looked like it was going to take 14 hours or something. We were like, no, thank you.
So if you watch the baking show, they did say a good babka should take 14 hours, but you can do it in a few, and you can, and it's sugar and flour and butter and stuff. So I don't know, the amount of time doesn't seem that relevant to whether it's delicious.
You've got to get Shannon Sarna's Modern Jewish Baker. She
Absolutely.
has the most fabulous recipes from Zatar challah, but my daughter and I made a fig spread goat cheese babka. Out of this world. They have birthday babkas that have the sprinkles. I mean, really, really creative, mixing it up where it's a savory babka or a really sweet
I
challah.
work with Shannon 70 Phases. She's definitely on team. You should give it all the time, do all the rises. Proofing is important. I will say I watched and I felt like the criticism was unfair. The thing that got people going this week was I think Prue saying, I had a babka in New York and this is better. And that, that could be. You can have a good babka in any country.
So. Melissa, it was the way she even said, I guess I've had one in New York. As it was such a it felt like this code for, isn't this a weird Jewish thing? And then this
I don't know. I mean, we know that
and this is right after they made rainbow bagels, which are such an abomination.
So I will say that I went down the rabbit hole a little bit, and I will say I don't know what's in anybody's hearts. I do know that Matt Lucas, the new host, is Jewish. He's probably had a babka before. And also I then watched Paul Hollywood has a show called City Bakes, where he goes around different cities and eats. We've been watching this every night. And he went to Jerusalem, and this was in 2017. And it is 20 minutes. It's on YouTube. I, as someone who made a point while living in Jerusalem to eat a bake every day, I think he has a true appreciation for that city and the diversity of it. And that I don't know that I've seen that many depictions of. So that was a really nice thing to find after watching the baking show. I think
I can't wait to go watch it. That's awesome.
Yes, and then you can go to Reykjavik and Bergen, Norway, and Cape Town. We've been everywhere, and I've been Googling, are these people Jewish? Are they? Wait, can I go on a Jewish baking food tour of the world once we can leave our homes? So
yeah,
Laura, you've been wanting to say something.
I do think once we're past COVID, someone should challenge Paul Hollywood to a babka bake-off.
Babka looked good. The one he made looked very good, I have to say.
Yeah.
I will also say, I'm salivating I'm forgetting the name of this bakery, but there's a bakery in Jerusalem that was famous for its rugelach. And then they started making this rugelach cake, which is essentially the middle of the rugelach. It's like an inch thick, and it's just kind of, it's like a sheet, they have those awesome those loaf pan cakes.
Yeah.
And it's like the middle of the rugelach, and it's sort of the best of rugelach and babka made into this other thing. My favorite thing ever. Not very helpful that I've not said the name of the bakery.
We can't.
You said it was marzipan?
Was it marzipan? I mean, that's the rugelach place.
Yeah, maybe it's marzipan.
So if we're talking, I mean, we have run over, but if we're talking about places in Jerusalem to get baked goods, I lived by a bakery that was very small called Lechem Shel Tomer, and they had a carrot tahini loaf that changed my life. And actually, Shannon Sarna this week on the Nasher ran a piece, about tahini and how it is emerged as the condiment for the world. That was my introduction to tahini in baking, and I would like to really take a trip right now. So.
Well, maybe the episode after elections, we need to ask Shannon to come on as our guest and just talk about dessert.
I think we will need that, and I really do. I think that that's a segment here. You need that to counteract all the stuff that we are covering and talking about and thinking about. I'll ask her.
And someone watching, Lynn just said the best babka is Flakowitz in Boynton Beach. So
All right, we can definitely do some, maybe a cross publication reader engagement effort around Babka, because this is the thing that people have a lot to say.
there you go. You heard it. Breaking news. Well, with that, we wish everyone listening a very sweet Shabbat. I thank you so much. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Felissa, as always. Thank you to Marae, who is manning the tech. And the hoodies are, I think, because of Jody's awesome hoodie that we now, maybe we need to get some swag, some Women on the Week swag. We'll look into that. But thank you all. We will see you next week, noon Eastern. Shabbat Shalom.